Well, hey, Shepherd family, this is Pastor Scott Seidler, part two of our Shepherd podcast with Dale Kreienkamp, and talking about ministry, not just to those who are walking through a season of unemployment, but also those who are supporting them as they walk through that season of unemployment, understanding that as family and friends, whether parents or as a spouse or even as a child, we have a responsibility to them because we are walking with them through these days of them figuring out, what do I do when my vocation that I've become dependent on for my income and also for my identity gets taken from me? Dale, welcome back. We're so glad to have you here at Shepherd in our digital ministry. Welcome again.
Thanks. Good to be back.
Hey, give us a little bit of information about where your expertise and experience have brought you when it comes to supporting the family, the friends, the social network of those that are walking through a season of unemployment.
So it's been a learning by going through it, Scott. You learn how to support by how you were supported. And while everybody's a little bit different, there are some common things that are really helpful for people as they struggle and they go through unemployment. I think one of the most important things is to let people know that, again, the person who's unemployed is trying to protect, I'll use the phrase, their own dignity, their own pride, and they want to act like they've got it together even when they may not. And they're going to be very guarded as to when they let that shield down to let you peek behind the curtain until they know you really care enough. So as an example, if you ask someone, how's it going? Their immediate response is going to be, oh, it's going fine. They might throw in a couple cliches like, well, you know, one door closed, the Lord will open another door, it'll be fine. And if you just take that and walk away, you'll think they're fine and they might be struggling. So they almost need somebody to say, no, really, how are you doing? I'm fine. No, really, how are you doing? I'm fine. No, I really want to know how you're doing. After about the third time, they'll say, okay, I'll let you in. You must really want to know and you must really care, because if you're that vigilant, then let's talk and I will let my guard down and I'll tell you where I really am. So it has to be an intentional, proactive desire on somebody's part to care, not I want to be able to satisfy myself that I've asked, but not really know, you know?
Yeah, right. Well, what are some pointers to guard against if you're in that social network? What are some things that you shouldn't do relative to your care for that unemployed spouse or son or daughter?
I think giving them advice unless they're asking is a really tough one, especially the way people tend to say it. So they'll tend to say something like, well, you know, when I was unemployed, I did A, B, and C, and I found a job in 2.5 months. So all you need to do is A, B, and C. Well,
right.
That person may have already done those things and not had it happen. So again, it becomes how do you feel like, well, what's wrong with me then? So you're not really helping them unless they ask for advice. So if they ask, absolutely. But in terms of giving advice, I would say stay away from that. We sometimes joke about, so the joking people, it depends on who's doing the needling. So within family will give each other trouble, and that's part of it, and that's an okay thing. I remember once when I was unemployed, there are 3 sons who were all of driving age and my wife, and we had 4 vehicles. We didn't have a 5th at that time. And I remember one night we were talking about who gets a car the next day, and everybody talked about needing to go somewhere, and I, of course, did. And one of my sons popped up and said, so wait a second, how come the guy that doesn't have a job gets a car? You know, and they all looked at me like, how am I going to react? Well, it was a needle, and I laughed, and they laughed, and we were fine. So you have to have a pretty good relationship on the needle. So stay away from things like, well, can you help me here? Because I know you've got time because you're unemployed. They don't need to hear that again.
I think what I'm reminded of right now, dear friends of yours and mine, David Ludwig and John Eckrich, who will essentially divide humanity into two groups. And they use the phrase painters and pointers. Pointers are people who are always ready to give you advice, to tell you this is what you need to do in order to make it through. Painters are those that want to ask the question, kind of like you just said, how are you doing? What is the bigger picture of your life that you're really trying to get at? In Scripture, it of course is Mary and Martha, and I'm just reminded, as you talk, that sometimes unemployed folks, all of us, sometimes we need pointers, sometimes we need painters, sometimes we need and we want people to help us with direction. Other times we want people to just help us, with our identity, who we are, and being sensitive to which one of these people are needed for this unemployed person that we love and care for. That's a real priority, and it takes a great deal of wisdom, patience, and prayer, doesn't it?
Yeah, and your point was extremely appropriate, which is it is asking the right question. And so when you say to somebody, how can I best help you? They're going to be able to then open up. So they could be stuck and they need some wisdom, and they might say, I've tried A, B, and C and I'm stuck. Do you have other thoughts? Well, that's your cue to go in and offer advice. If that's not where they go, they just might need to vent or just somebody to talk to, and just know that somebody cares. It is like a death, but you're not dead. And so people don't know what to say around you. And so it becomes really awkward. And so if you care, you don't care how awkward it is. I'm going to be with you to walk through this with you because I care about you.
I'm assuming that the same emotions that work in the heart of someone walking through a season of unemployment can be similar to the spouse or the children or the parents, the friends, friends a little less so, but those that are, part of the family, they're working through anger as well. I know that as a husband to my wife, who is a professional, that what happens to her at work is not emotionally neutral to me. I am not just a distant observer and participant in her work life. If someone gets chippy with her at work, I tend to get reactively chippy toward them. And I don't even know who these people are half the time. And so talk a little bit about what it means for us. Now let's go back, third degree of separation. How do I best support those who are supporting the unemployed? If my son or daughter, let's say, adult son or daughter, has a spouse that's going through unemployment, what do I do with them? I'm assuming there's a lot of overlap.
Yeah, there is, because when someone is married to somebody who's going through unemployment, they're going through the same emotions. They have fears and worries about, what does this mean for me? Just as you mentioned, they're not a passive participant in work life. They've given up their time with their spouse so that they could work, and all of a sudden the job's not there, so they probably got their own anger. So they have all of those too, but they're often forgotten. They're missed. Scott, because we were in the same congregation for many years, so I am pretty well known in the congregation because I grew up there.
Right.
And I can't tell you how many people my wife would come by and say, how's Dale? How's the search going? Because they cared about me.
Sure.
But rarely did somebody say, Deb, how are you doing?
Yeah.
And so one of the pieces of advice I would say is, ask that spouse how they're doing with the search.
That's so good.
Listen to them, because they need somebody to talk about. So the challenge for a spouse is they always need to be up, because they have to be the balance. So I mentioned in the first half when we talked, it's a roller coaster ride of emotions. Sure. Good days, bad days. Well, my wife would say, I'm always trying to be up, because if it's a bad day for you, I need to be ready to go.
So good.
And so just somebody to listen to them is really helpful.
Yeah, and I just think as pastor in our congregation that we shared for 13 years, that's, I think, the hardest thing for church workers, pastors, is we hear about, the person that's going through the cancer treatment, who's been diagnosed with cancer. And of course, we're reaching out to them. But as we know, the caregiver needs the support as well. If they don't have the oxygen mask on their face, they're not going to be able to care for the one who is undergoing chemotherapy and radiation and whose life is really hanging in the balance. I just appreciate that. As you've walked through this, this whole ministry and starting this ministry, what are some of the resources that you've drawn on, that you look to and have really held as kind of, man, these are locations and these are resources that gave me the wisdom and insight to chart new territory now in my own ministry?
So I've read a lot and I've talked to a lot of people, and that's really what I've spent most of my time doing. I read a lot about grief, because this is really a grieving process. Even though we don't often talk about it as grief, it is grief.
Yeah.
So the more that you know and better understand grief, the better off. And then listening to people's stories to find out. And so I get a lot of phone calls from people in the St. Louis area say, I've got a friend who's out of work. Would you have a cup of coffee with them? And it's like, absolutely. And it's in listening to the stories. And I spend more time talking about how they're doing emotionally, how's the family, how are those things. I just learn a lot picking things up from people in those conversations. And then I talk to people professionally in the job search market so that sometimes I can lend a hand and give them some wisdom to maybe get them unstuck as they move forward.
Sure. Well, I appreciate the curating that you have essentially done, taking all of those points of view and the experiences you've had personally in your professional career, both good and bad, essentially, but also the wisdom that you bring into this as you assemble these resources and then figure out, okay, what is the way forward in terms of devotional life, prayer, and spirituality. We're going to take a short break. After we come back from our break, though, we're going to go in to the ministry side of Dale's life and how it is that he's now going about bringing hope into what can be some pretty hopeless experiences and moments, both for those who are unemployed and those who are the social network for the employed. So we'll see you back on the other side of this break, and we'll pick up our conversation then. Hey, this is Pastor Scott Seidler coming back from our break, still talking with Dale Kreienkamp about what it means to minister and to support those who are walking through a season of unemployment. And in this particular segment, to pick up on a thread that we had left unattended from our time before the break, and that is, how do you support kids who are witnesses and not innocent bystanders to this season of unemployment that their parents and caregivers are going through. Dale, great to have you. Pick up that thread if you would. What's your insight regarding that kind of ministry and care for those little ones?
Well, I think it becomes really important to be honest with kids. Mom and dad are an example as they go through this trial as to how do you deal with trials when you face those. And so you really need to be upfront with what's going on and be honest with them. Otherwise, they will create their own either safe zone or go to a completely opposite end and be completely petrified.
Right.
So you need to be honest. If the kids are old enough to understand finances, it might be to say, you know, I don't know that we're going to go on the vacation we planned. We may have to push that off a year, or we may change where we're going, but be honest about what's going on. And so little kids especially will create their own. I had a friend of mine who was unemployed, and she said she asked her son, is there anything you want to ask me? And his question to her was, Mom, do we have enough money to have food, and am I still going to be able to have a place to sleep?
Wow.
So that child went from listening to mom and dad talk about it. They know and are sensing something's going on, but they didn't know how to put it in context. So you have to be able to talk to them. You're going to see dad or mom more often than you did. We're looking for a new job. We're going to be okay. It's a great chance to talk about faith. God's going to help us get through this process.
Yeah.
So that's also a place where the church can help in terms of helping and equipping parents with those conversations, because they may just want to try it out. Here's what I'm thinking I need to do or to say. And so it's a great opportunity to lend a hand on that end.
Yeah, and going back all the way to the beginning of our first part to this podcast, 21.7 million people over 10 years. And the reality that there's a greater than likely chance that our children at some point in time will themselves be walking through a season of unemployment. And so what we do now, how we conduct ourselves and how we care for our loved ones as they're walking through unemployment will be witnessed by our kids. And someday that may become the model by which they then practice their journey through unemployment. And so if we're handling it in a at least relatively healthy way, we give them something to model and to replicate in their adult lives. Huh? I mean, that's just a basic tenet.
I've had that conversation with my children who are now older. They're all in their 30s and parents themselves. And when I've asked them about what that was like and what they took away from it, it was, Dad, you were faithful to a process and you did things differently. So you didn't just hold the tents. And, you don't know what you're doing. And as you go through it, I would say we don't always realize the impact we're having until later on. And it is an important thing.
Well, I will say Dan and Drew and Don, your three boys, have grown up to be great men of God, and you can be proud of them. And I know that is a true statement. You have modeled healthiness through your, couple journeys with unemployment, but also the kind of thoughtfulness and care that you exercised when you were an executive in human resources and were sitting on the other side of the table delivering bad news. And so that's just a compliment to who you are as a man of God, Dale, and to the family that you've raised. As we make our way kind of to the end of this podcast, talk a little bit about your ministry and talk a little bit about the resources that you have provided and authored in order to help families and those who are unemployed not only walk through this, but thrive in the midst of unemployment.
Thanks for the opportunity to talk about those. So first off is the book itself, which is How Long, O Lord, How Long? Devotions for the Unemployed and Those Who Love Them. And so that subtitle is so important because it does connect to those family members to give them a glimpse of what's going on in the life of someone who is unemployed. I once had somebody who sent me an email. She had gotten a book from her boss who knew that her husband had lost his job. She sent me an email and said, "Oh my gosh, I have been the spouse, from the wrong place because I've been doing everything wrong because I didn't understand what he was going through." So it was really written to not only help the person who's unemployed, but those that love them, to give them that glimpse behind that. The most interesting thing about it, Scott, is I sell very few books to people that are unemployed, because
Right.
the unemployed tend not to reach out and say, "I need the help. We're in control. I got this. We're fine." But everybody else around them notices it. So it's a
Yep.
great gift. It's a gift to give to somebody that they will use, but they wouldn't necessarily ask or reach out for it. In addition to that, I wrote a group study that goes with the book that's ideal for a church that wants to do not only something for their members or the outreach into the community. Um, you get books, the facilitator guide and participant guide, the PDF of it, all for one package price, which is equal to, I like to say, in the world of the Lutheran Church, is Thriving Financial, which originally got its roots in the Lutheran Church. They are far beyond that these days, but they do an action team for $250, so you can get everything you need for $250. And one of the things that we did in the study is I've updated the facilitator guide to include guidance for meeting virtually. Because right now, a lot of churches can't get together and meet with people, so there's a way to, how do we do this on Zoom? How do we connect with people? I write a weekly blog that's available on my website. It's at dalekreienkamp.com, and you can sign up for the blog, and it comes out on a weekly basis. It not only gives wisdom for people that are in a job search, but those in leadership, those who just need encouragement, as well as articles and blogs that relate to personal or professional development. And then on the side, I've got some other downloads that'll help people in a job search. So what do I do if I become unemployed? How do I help somebody who is unemployed? Some different tips are on the website. We continue to develop and add more to that.
Yep. And for our Shepherd family here in Scottsdale, we have these resources available, and you can, by contacting our Shepherd office, we can make those available for you for purchase, and we're glad to pass those on. I want you to know, Dale, that as a pastor, I am repentant right now, especially in this season of such intense unemployment in our American culture, for how I have not prepared myself for this level of unemployment and anxiety in our culture. But at the same time, as we moved in and we started up these Shepherd podcasts, I can compliment you by saying I thought of you immediately as a national thought leader in this area of ministry. And it is just my pleasure to be able to talk with you and to know that you're a partner for unemployed people and their families, for sure, but you're also a partner for the church and congregations that want to do the best they can in the communities in which they live. And I'm going to be taking another look through your book. Was there when you started it, when you wrote it, and now I need to brush up so that I can become more prepared for helping those walk through the grief of unemployment. Last word, Dale, is all yours. Anything else you want to share before we wrap up today?
Listen, I just appreciate the opportunity to talk about it, and I appreciate your care and concern for those that are unemployed in your congregation and in your community. That's my goal and hope, is that the church, I recognize this is beyond where everybody thought it would be. It's just a regular issue, and the more that we can be proactive and be upfront trying to help people, they're going to let you know, and there's a way to do it. And one thing I would tell any pastor, you've got people in your congregation who've been unemployed before. They will be advocates to help you help others,
Right.
because they want to pay back what people did for them. And they have an opportunity to pay it forward to help you help those. So pastors, you don't have to meet with everybody yourself who's unemployed, but if you've got a team of people in your congregation that can reach out on your behalf and walk the journey with them, that'll just be immensely valuable.
Well, and I think especially here in Scottsdale, Arizona, where we have so many retirees, many of whom have lived in some management or executive, employment, how much they have in terms of a resource and the time to give into this very significant area of ministry. Well, thanks again, Dale, for being part of this podcast, and I look forward to seeing where your ministry goes as you cry out and we all cry out with those who are unemployed. How long, O Lord? Trusting that our God and Father, who is the Ancient of Days, says to us, I may not tell you exactly how long, but I will be your Lord, and I will be your Savior, and I will be your counselor and advocate and comforter through all these days until it comes to pass that you are reemployed, and then ultimately when we celebrate the fullness of knowing we don't have to work anymore because all of his work has come to fruition and we are with our Heavenly Father in heaven. So thanks again for that gospel ministry. And Dale, thank you for your friendship these many years. I look forward to seeing you again soon here in Scottsdale. And for all of our Shepherd family, whether here in Scottsdale or through our digital congregation, this is Pastor Scott Seidler. Have a great rest of the day, and I hope to see you again soon.